everybody. Welcome once again to the Retro Wrestling Review Podcast. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and we are here for episode number 7 of the show. Moving right along, and today we are going to be reviewing the February 13th, 1993 episode of USWA Wrestling. And today, to do that, I have a couple of special guest co-hosts. Richard and Josh are still AWOL. They have got things going on. They're not AWOL. I know where they're at, but they're going to be back real soon. But today, I'm excited to introduce a couple of special guest co-hosts. The first guy, he is the man who brings you Bryan Turner's VHS Rehab over on YouTube. My God, a treasure trove of classic old school wrestling. Welcome to the show, the man himself, Mr. Bryan Turner.
What's up, Gene? How you doing?
Doing good, man. I'm excited to have you here. And holy shit, man, you talk about one of my favorite YouTube channels out there. I get in the mood to watch some wrestling. You got a little of everything on there, man. I mean, whatever it is you're into, Bryan's got it.
Much appreciated. Yeah, before I got in the business, I was actually a tape trader. So I'm pretty sure I tape traded with Tony Khan. He's never going to admit that, but because I probably scammed him on some stuff. But that's how we even built the channel. It's, all of us pulling collections together. So you'd be surprised some of the footage who we got him from. So
hell yeah, man. I used to do some tape trading back in the day too. We may end up doing a whole nother podcast one of the days, to swapping stories about tape trading, because I know there's some fun stories.
Those old Usenet boards.
Yeah, the old all the old message boards and getting scammed for 10th generation bullshit. And
dude,
every time you turned around, they were the one person on earth that had the last Battle of Atlanta on VHS, first generation copy. Get ready, it's coming.
I swear to God, the MPAA showed up at my door, the Motion Picture Association of America, because we were selling bootleg Titanics on eBay. But they were looking for my brother, but he had joined the service, so they had dropped the thing. But they do show up. That FBI thing is real.
We're going to revisit this one day, but we got to get going on some USWA. But before we do that, we got to bring our other special guest co-host. This man is the podcasting guru behind Live and in Color with Wolfie D, as well as the great Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling with his co-host, the Plastic Sheik. You know who I'm talking about. It's the one and only Jimmy Street.
What is up, fellas? How we doing today, guys?
Doing good, man. Excited to have you guys here.
Yeah, excited to be here, Gene. Whenever I hear that we've got the powers of Bryan Turner's VHS Rehab and the powers of the Podfather himself, Gene Jackson, combined with the insanity of Jimmy Street, oh my God. This may not be able to be aired, but we'll do it.
It may not. It's a good thing we're not live, is all I can say. There may have to be some cuts in this thing somewhere along the way. But this podcast, we cover old USWA wrestling, and I can't think of two guys better to come here and talk about it. I know you guys share my love and affection for it, and we're here going through 1993. We made our way through January. Now we're up into February. We got a fun show to cover. Last week we covered the Doink the Clown episode, which had been my favorite so far. Man, Doink was all over that show. Me and Bryan was talking about before we started recording how, Matt Bourne, that character had so much more potential than, what they ended up doing with it. And that was a lot to do with him.
Yeah.
And how he ended up. But, man, if folks that hasn't watched that episode, I don't just mean the podcast, you can go on the YouTube channel, Retro Wrestling Network, and watch that episode. And if they had played that character the way they played it on that show that day, they had all his silly clown antics, but then promo and just the up and down. He's happy, he's sad, and then he's just putting on a clinic in the ring.
Yeah.
Just such great stuff. But today we've got another WWF superstar is going to be sliding in on us, but we'll get there. Dave and Corey opened the show this week. They let us know that we're going to be seeing the King in action against the Rock and Roll Phantom. Eddie and Doug Gilbert will be tagging together, challenging the Bruise Brothers for their newly won USWA tag team titles. And then the Narcissist, Lex Luger from the WWF, is here. And we'll also be seeing Bryan Christopher taking on Jeff Jarrett right here today on the show in the studio. That's a feud that's been brewing for a while. As everybody knows that's been watching this podcast or listening to it, Bryan Christopher put up every heel in the USWA's hair against Jeff Jarrett's Southern Heavyweight title before finally getting the belt away from Jeff. So we're going to see them go at it right here today. Of course, USWA, they tell us what we can expect. We immediately go to a break. And then as we come back, Dave Brown is joined at the desk by Bryan Christopher, who in true Jimmy Hart fashion tells us today is the greatest day of his life. And that leads him to introducing the narcissist Lex Luger. And it's kind of fun listening to some of these guys try to pronounce. Some are saying narcissist, some are saying narcissus. It's not really their fault because we know Bobby Heenan went back and forth on that. Right. When he introduced him in WWF, it started out he was just narcissist, and then he was the narcissist. And of course, down south, we're going to have trouble with that.
Yeah.
I was going to compliment you on the correct enunciation of that, actually, but then I remembered they went back and forth. So.
I had all week to practice, so I didn't want to sound like an idiot on here. So let's take a look at our first clip of the day. Let's hear from Bryan Christopher and see what he has to say about the greatest day of his life, apparently. That's exciting.
Oh, we've been joined by Bryan Christopher, who's getting exactly the respect from the crowd that he deserves.
Dave! That's because they're imbeciles. And Dave, a lot of these people sitting at home are just as stupid. Now, what I'm out here for today, Dave, is because this has got to be the greatest day of my life. Today has got to be the cherry on top, Dave, because for weeks and weeks I've come out here and I've tried to tell all you idiots out there how important I am. I am a double champion. You understand me? That means I am important. And when you're so important in the wrestling business, you get to meet other important people. And somebody important that I got the chance to meet this week was not Vince McMahon. It wasn't nobody like Jack Tunney, who I had the privilege of meeting this week. Shut up. You know, I demand respect, people. That means shut your mouths. Somebody that I had the privilege of meeting this week was a man by the name of the Narcissist Lex Luger. That is right, because I've been palling around with all the WWF superstars because they are the best in the business, just like myself.
Okay, so Bryan's out here. He's got his 2 titles. We've kind of had a little fun here on the show talking about the fact that he's still toting around that Texas title, even though the USWA hasn't ran Texas in almost 2 years at this point. But we're still carrying that belt around. We're going to get to Lex Luger here in a moment, but just to kind of start things off, and I guess we'll go by in alphabetical order here. We'll start with Bryan, plus you share a name with him. Give us your thoughts on this era of Bryan Christopher.
I like any era of Bryan Christopher because he's the word I'm just looking for is entertaining. He's he projects a lot. So this era of Bryan Christopher is probably my favorite because he's not leaning into that laugh so hard. You know what I'm talking about? The laugh took me out later on when he was doing the too much when he actually went to WWF, and the way he said narcissist. Better than I could say it.
A couple of weeks ago on the show, Jeff Jarrett said he was looking smart out there in his suit, and he said that's because he was the valedictorian of his class. And I told the co-host, I said, the funny thing about Bryan, I was like, I don't know if he did that for heat or if that's really how Bryan thought you'd pronounce valedictorian. It could go either way.
Yeah, either way. It probably was a shoot.
I'm sure. Jimmy?
Man, I love Bryan. The one thing I noticed about Bryan so much is how good a shape he is in. Dude is jacked. And I've always been a fan of Bryan Christopher. I mean, it's impossible to not like the guy. Yeah. Unless you knew him personally. I think some people probably had problems with that. I've just heard from Wolfie, you know what I mean? But Bryan, man, as a fan of the business, you just watch him and you're like, oh my God, this guy's magical,
Yeah. He's entertaining.
Yeah.
You hear people will get called a natural, and, I mean, there was a gimmick for Dustin Rhodes, but I mean, I think that really pertains to Bryan, because by all accounts of everyone I've talked to over the years, and since I've been doing this podcast, I've done a lot of research and talking to different people. And Bryan didn't particularly have any formal training. I mean, a lot of people just assume, oh, he's Jerry Lawler's kid. Jerry trained him, and probably Bill Dundee. No, he didn't. Him and Kevin and Scott Bowden and Mr. Clyde that you see on here, and some of these folks, they ran their own backyard promotion in their neighborhood, and he was kind of self-taught. And so when you watch Bryan in this era, especially the TV we reviewed so far from January, the psychology in his matches and his promos and the way he carries himself, I mean, you would think that he was already a 10-year veteran who had, probably been trained by the very best. And he had, but in the ring, on the job training. So it's pretty, like I say, that's been, the theme of this show has been, if nothing else about this podcast, I really want to shine a light on how good USWA Bryan Christopher. I mean, that's great that he was Grandmaster in the WWF, and people love that character, and it served its purpose. But people who only know him from his, national run with Too Cool and the little bit of Too Sexy you saw in the early days with Too Much, like Bryan referred to a minute ago, if you didn't get to see this version of Bryan Christopher as a heel, you didn't see the best of Bryan Christopher.
How old was he here, Gene? Do you know?
I would say he's probably not more than maybe 22.
Yeah,
maybe.
He's polished. He looks great.
Because, I mean, when he was starting out as the New Kids with Tony Williams in like 91, he was like barely like 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
He started super young. So, yeah, this is early Bryan Christopher in every way. So right now, he brings out Lex Luger. He just introduced him in the previous clip. Let's hear a little bit of what Lex Luger has to say here. And so this is, keep in mind, folks, for context, Luger had left WCW. He ended up in the Bodybuilding Federation. He had that motorcycle wreck. So a combination of having that wreck and his WCW contract, he couldn't start immediately. So they brought him into the WBF, and he did the bodybuilding. Now he's getting ready to come into the WWF as the Narcissist Lex Luger. They sent him down to Memphis just to kind of get him on camera, and they're going to get him in a few matches with a few different people. And so this is his first appearance on USWA television. And guys, haven't only seen him in, Florida and, Jim Crockett Promotions, WCW. To see Lex Luger standing in the WMC studio is one of these moments in this show that feels really odd. It's one of the times it really stands out, like this, one of these things don't belong. So let's hear what Lex has to say.
But here he is, ladies and gentlemen, right now, here today, the Narcissist, Lex Luger!
It is indeed Lex Luger. I think every wrestling fan knows about Lex Luger.
Let's establish one thing right off the bat. The mere presence of the Narcissist, Lex Luger, will eliminate any challenges, any derogatory remarks from the King Jerry Lawler or anyone else by my mere presence here today. There'll be no challenges with the presence of Lex Luger here today. It's just the fact that I'm here. Dogs bark real loud, but when they're scared, they bark the loudest. And when they're confronted with true danger, they are totally silent. And that's what you'll see here today. Now, in fact, the matter is, I think we should give these people maybe just one little peek.
They don't deserve it, Lex.
Of what greatness.
They don't deserve it, Lex.
How unbelievable the Narcissist Lex Luger really is. Because I have no shortcomings, I have no flaws. Now you're asking, why am I here? Well, my business managers want me to have some tune-up wins before WrestleMania on April 4th in Las Vegas. Because there's one thing I love almost as much as myself. That is establishing my superiority and my dominance over every single wrestler worldwide. And that's why I'm here, because I want every nook and cranny from New Zealand to this area here to bow on their knees before me and say, yes, Lex, you are the greatest. Yes, Lex, you are unbelievable. You truly are the greatest wrestler.
Bryan selling him taking off the jacket was my favorite part of that whole clip.
Oh, you saw me?
So, if you didn't believe me that this is 1993, folks, I mean, Lex Luger comes out. He's got his acid wash jeans on. He's got his fanny pack on. He's got his New Japan workout jacket on.
He's got the Spirit Studios creator wrestler outfit on.
And in classic Lex Luger form, in every promo you've ever seen, he's got the finger point. He points the finger and then he brings it across. And then he points the finger and he brings it across. But as Lex Luger promos go, he really only stumbled over one word: superiority. But overall, like I say, as the Lex Luger promo goes on live TV, not bad.
Yeah,
so
he was on to something with the yes, Lex. Yes, Lex. He should have kept that going with something. I like.
Yeah,
that.
They might should have sent Bryan up to the WWF with him to be with him in Heenan, because, like I said, Bryan Christopher's face when he starts taking the jacket off, he lights up and he's like,
"Oh yeah,
they don't deserve it, Lex. They don't deserve it, Lex." Like, he's having too much fun with this.
Yeah, like the little the cartoon little dog with the big dog. You know what I'm talking? Just amping him up, or whatever. The chicken, whatever it is. I don't remember, but yeah, that would have been a good gimmick.
All right, so we'll kind of do like we did with Bryan here real quick. So, and we're having too many Bryans, but Bryan Christopher, so Bryan Turner. So in 1993, what is your take on Lex Luger? If you're sitting here watching this 1993, you see Lex Luger walk on your screen. What are you thinking?
That would have been my first experience ever seeing Lex Luger at 93, because we didn't get WCW over on the military bases over there. So my first experience ever was the Narcissist. So that's my first ever experience. That's the original Lex Luger that I know. So all the dude, I was following the Lex Express in Germany. There was no Lex Express in Germany, you know. But I was all in on the narcissist Lex Luger. I'm all in on that. Yeah, it's good promo.
Jimmy, where did you pick up with Lex and his career?
Oh man, well I've watched Lex since he first came to Crockett. I didn't see the him running away from Bruiser Brody in the cage match, but I didn't catch much of his Florida stuff. But I absolutely saw him from the beginning of Crockett, being a Mid-Atlantic kid, and he was always a physical specimen, but never my favorite. So it seemed like his because his first real run was with the Horsemen. It seemed to fit his gimmick. Obviously, the look, they were putting him in a spot. But, I mean, there's some funny stuff about a promo that I noticed with Bryan and him coming up. But we'll save that for a minute. But
yeah, we'll definitely get there. And see, that's kind of the fun thing for me, is hearing where people pick up people's career, because you just kind of take it for granted that, oh well, people know people the same amount of time that I have. And I'm kind of like you, and I've found, listening to your podcast and talking to you like we have, our fandom almost parallels or time frame wise. And so I remember Luger coming into Jim Crockett Promotions, and I mean, like I said, super impressive. And I was young, I'm 9-10 years old at the time, so I don't understand work rate and all that crap. I just knew he was a super muscular dude, and still managed to lose the U.S. title to Dusty Rhodes eventually. But you mentioned the running away from the cage from Bruiser Brody. That circles back to the tape trading things. That was definitely, once I heard about that was definitely something I sought out on the tape trading boards and had to see.
Wildest match ever, compilation 97, probably something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we take another commercial break, and when we get back, they show us a music video of Bryan Christopher set to a song, "I'm Evil." Yeah, we have that clip. We're gonna skip over it. It'll be on the YouTube channel if you want to see it.
Damn it!
But first match, the USWA Southern Champion Bryan Christopher with Burt Prentice and Mike Samples.
Ooh.
That's right. Bryan has two managers, or as he referred to them often, valets. Taking on Jeff Jarrett. It's a fun match here. Of course, with these two guys, you got some pretty good psychology going on. So let's take a look at some highlights of this match with Bryan Christopher and Jeff Jarrett real quick.
Yeah, Corey, you just lost your mic. Thank you. You know, like I said before, I'm sitting here watching, observing, checking out what sort of wrestling talent there truly is here in the USWA, because my business people actually thought I might not want to come here because of the competition, which makes me want to come here all the more to establish my superiority.
Well, I think you're going to find that your business people were right as far as the level of competition is concerned. We've got some of the great wrestlers ever. Bryan, we don't like his attitude at all, but he is a fine wrestler, and Jeff Jarrett is just
wrestle well above their abilities just by me being here and observing, because they're going to want to impress, because obviously they're going to want to have a match with Lex Luger. Just to say they've actually been in the ring with the Narcissist Lex Luger.
Well, I mean, there's no denying.
Out of your own mouth that you mentioned that some of
Corey,
the
you
best
got yourself a microphone.
is in the USWA. Yeah, you
Corey
took
got
mine
himself
there.
a microphone.
Yeah,
How about that?
Yeah, we have an extra
What were you
mic
saying,
there.
Corey?
Just remember that the words came out of your mouth, Lex, that some of the best talent is right here in the USWA.
The Bisons do exactly the same thing right here at USWA.
Well, we'll see if that's all they do. Jeff Jarrett.
Yeah, missed.
Hey, look at
Oh! Christopher turned around and Jarrett nailed him, boy.
When we have top talent in the wrestling business here, and in that respect, yes, it is good to have you here. Look at that. Samples just tripped up
Right
Jeff
there.
Jarrett.
I think Mike Samples was trying to fix the ring for me as he went by.
Hey, what about Burt Prentice
Prentice,
there?
look
What
at
about
this. Grabbing
that?
Jeff and hanging on to
I
it.
think this bootlace is untied.
Look
Right,
at,
Corey?
look at Jeff Jarrett. He
Look, now
grabs
he's
a
going to
hold
fight
of
the wars
him.
again.
Oh! Christopher comes over and knocks Prentice off the apron. He's on the floor. Jarrett DDT's Christopher. Here comes Samples. Yeah, call for the bell. Jeff Jarrett lights
Obviously, the
Samples
picture
up.
rule's been made by Jeff Jarrett. He's just lost the match by disqualification in my eyes.
Well, he just won the match by disqualification because Mike.
All right, there you see the two managers definitely played a big factor in this match, but a lot of fun shenanigans from Bryan Christopher in the early stages of the match. So what are you guys' take on the match there, and the involvement of? I'm sure this could sidebar into a whole other show. I know you guys being Nashville guys, y'all got a lot to say about Burt, probably.
I got something to say
And
about
this is the
Samples.
first episode in a while that there wasn't significant time spent with Burt calling Miss Texas Bubba Johnson and saying she was a dude that had a sex change and all that stuff that's been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. But
Burt would know. Dude, first off, the amount of neon pink in that match was off the charts.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to watch the match because I was focusing on Burt and Samples across the ring. You know what I mean? I don't know if you're familiar with this, Gene, but Mike Samples creates all these rings around here. Did you know that?
yeah, well, I've learned that in recent years. And I knew over the years, a lot of times I'd say, hey, where'd y'all get y'all's ring? And they'd be like, Mike Samples. And I heard that so many times, like, all right, I guess he's the man.
Yeah, and it's so weird to see him in that butler outfit because the first we go back to saying the first time I see people. The first time I saw him was over in Big Japan or IWA Japan, where he was lighting some Japanese dude on fire, like literally lit the dude on fire. And he's just sitting there, country as hell, like, oh damn, what the hell, with all these Japanese guys running around. But back to the match, if you look at it. Dude, there was really only a couple bumps ever. There was a punch bump, a clothesline bump, and a DDT bump. That was all straight working 101. It was good.
Yeah. And I did notice that the Memphis guys have figured out there's a gym and not Jim's Bar and Grill. Because if you look at Jeff and Bryan compared to previous, big, and not knocking, I love the King and Superstar. But I'm just saying Jeff and Bryan are in incredible shape at this point. Yeah. They've maintained that as well. Jeff has still got some of the best arms in the business. I mean, he's, however old he is, 50s now, he's still keeping a good shape. But I do notice the focus on looking good has become a big thing in Memphis at this point too, which is cool, you know.
Yeah.
We got to figure at this point, you know, Jerry Jarrett has found an end with Vince, with WWF, and now Lawler's going up there. So I'm sure Bryan and Jeff both knew that, like, all right, well, if we're going to make our way up there, we can't be looking like Memphis guys. And they were well on their way to getting where they needed to be as far as the look goes. Jeff always had one of the most unique punches. Like that whole wind up that he comes from way down here with.
Bobby Eaton flipper, man.
Exactly. I always like those.
Yeah.
But you know, we see Samples, you know, just straight up come in for the DQ. They beat down on Jeff. Jerry Lawler, we didn't see it in the clip, but Jerry Lawler runs in for the save. And we see some stuff that we've been seeing for the last couple of weeks where, you know, Bryan starts challenging Lawler. Lawler gets in the ring, tells Bryan to come on. Lawler, you know, Bryan teases that he's going to get in the ring. And for the last 2 or 3 weeks, you know, they'd go back and forth. Bryan would come in and Bryan would run off. Well, this time Bryan goes to run off. Lawler gives chase, catches him at the curtains and gets a hold of him, lays a few punches in on him, gets a hold of him. So, you know, they're building up. We'll find out in a little bit that we're building up to a one-on-one match between Jerry Lawler and Bryan Christopher for the unified title. If I'm not mistaken, this would be the first match between Lawler and Bryan Christopher as far as a one-on-one encounter. And, of course, you know, the big talk back then amongst, you know, the smart fans and the dirt sheets and all that was the fact that, you know, we haven't acknowledged that Bryan is, you know, Jerry Lawler's son, which – you know, we wouldn't do really on Memphis TV for years. I don't think it ever actually was said in a public forum until Paul Heyman said it on commentary at a Raw, like a few years later.
Yeah.
But anyway, at one point, as they're all out there, Lawler and Jarrett's in the ring. Bryan looks at Lex and says, "Come on, Lex, let's go get him." And Lex is like, "No, I'm just here to watch, Bryan. I'm not here for that. I'm here to scout." And so I think I had my timeline off. I think it may have been later on when Lawler chases Bryan. But anyway, we had a couple more minutes of those guys out there arguing back and forth, and then we're ready for them to go to a commercial break. So we, too, are going to take our first commercial break for the podcast. Then, guys, we'll be right back to talk a little more about this episode of USWA.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
Hey guys, this is Wolfie D from PG-13. Check out my podcast, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, every Monday at noon. We're talking Memphis, we're talking ECW, WCW, WWF, everywhere that I've been. We even have some great guests, some Hall of Famers on the show with us. Every Monday at noon, Live and in Color with Wolfie D.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school, but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Sheik, Jared, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise. This team does it all, and all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling! Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, guys, we're back. And you know what I think this show needs that we haven't had enough of yet? I think we need some more Bryan Christopher.
Wasn't it Kennedy that once said, the torch is now passed to a new generation? And that's exactly what needs to be done with the world belt. This so-called king that has been running around here with the belt around his waist for so long, your time has passed. You are washed up, okay? You need to take it. I know that when you go up and down the street, when you go to the grocery store, people have got to ask you time and time again, when you gonna retire, King? When you gonna hang it up, King? Well, I can answer all them people's questions right here today. After this week, he'll be through. Because after this week, Bryan Christopher, the new superstar on the scene, is gonna be the new world champion. Everything has its day. Everybody has their day. And my day is now. King, I know you beat them all. You've wrestled them all. You're a big shot. But your time is over. You're through, King. I plan on being the new king around here.
Okay, so as everybody who's listening to this episode and previous episodes know, I mean, I'm a big fan of Bryan. Obviously, you guys are too. But, I mean, could we have not spaced these Bryan Christopher segments out a little better? I mean, we are 30-something minutes into this episode, and Bryan has been in every segment. Every second to this show has been on the air. Bryan Christopher has been on the screen.
Dude, either there's only 5 guys in the locker room and they're like, how the hell can we make a TV show? Let's just fill 60 minutes with just all Bryan Christopher. Or they're waiting for somebody to show up to the building. Something's going on where they have...
I mean, it's possible that maybe the Gilberts haven't shown up yet. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, surely not. But, I mean, I don't know. But, yeah, it seems like... we could have spaced these out. So I'm sure you're on to something there, Bryan. I'm sure we're doing that because somebody that we had planned to go on earlier is not here yet. But this was a pretty critical promo wherever you put it on the show, because we're setting up Bryan's Southern Heavyweight Champion. He's getting a shot at the title on Monday. He's saying that, Lawler's washed up and over the hill and he's going to be the new king. And, that's a fair statement. You can make the psychology argument of, whether or not you should say somebody's washed up and their time's passed and all that good stuff. But, I understand the people who criticize that, but it's a pretty obvious story to tell here, especially if you're not going to tell the story of, this is his son coming after him.
Dude, it looks just like him. I don't even understand how they didn't even try to just straight go with it's clearly Jerry Lawler's kid.
Right.
There's kind of a wink and a nod at times over the years. I mean, Lawler even makes a couple of cracks in a promo that we'll see here in just a moment that if you know type things. But
I think they just waited so long to pull the Band-Aid off that the expiration date was already passed. They're just like, screw it. Let's just not even reveal it. Let's just let it be its thing,
It's like most people know, and the people who are that dense that they haven't figured it out, why bother telling them at this point?
The promo was great with Bert huffing and puffing, walking around him. I thought it was a good promo, but just badly timed, like you said.
Yeah.
And Bert got some lines in at the end of it. I didn't include it just for time's sake, but he added to the promo as well. And Bert's good at promos. Like I said, the Bubba Johnson shit with Miss Texas wore thin because it just went on and on for what I felt like too many weeks. But that's Memphis for you. I mean, the Moondogs and the Bruise Brothers, we're now like 8 weeks of them wrestling each other every week, and we're gonna promote one of those later in the show. So, right now on the show, Dave and Corey Macklin run down the card for Monday night. We're not going to go over that right now because we always save that for the end. But one little tidbit I do want to mention, just because it'll come into play later. One of the matches that they mentioned for Monday night will be Eddie and Doug Gilbert taking on the Knights of Darkness, which apparently is going to be a new team coming in. We've never heard of the Knights of Darkness, so that should be an interesting tag team match coming up Monday night with the Gilberts returning and a new tag team apparently debuting. So next we go to
I got a question.
Another commercial. Yes.
Now, were they using the same gimmick from the '93 Survivor Series, the Knights? You know what I'm talking about?
No, because we're in February here, so
Oh, okay, never mind.
that hasn't happened yet.
You're right.
Yeah, that'll all make sense to you a little bit later on once some things happens.
Gotcha.
So it's time to finally move on. We're going to move on from Bryan Christopher. No, wait. We're going to go to highlights of everything that's gone on between Bryan Christopher and Jerry Lawler.
No.
So we see clips of everything that's gone on for the past several weeks between Bryan and Jerry Lawler to help set up a match for Monday night. And so now we're going to move past Bryan Christopher. No, wait. It's time for Jerry Lawler to do a promo. I wonder who he's going to talk about.
I saw that video. I know you heard what Christopher's had to say.
Well, I've seen a lot of things, as everybody has witnessed here today. Bryan Christopher thinks he's the new cock of the walk. He thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. He's bringing the Narcissist Lex Luger in here. He thinks he's going to pal around with him. Well, Bryan, I'm sure that you think your future is so bright you got to wear sunglasses at night. Well, let me tell you something. Let me just smarten you up to something, punk. There's a real dark cloud in your future. You may not realize it, but your future is not nearly as rosy and as bright as you think it is. Sure, you've got Lex Luger in here, and you think you're going to be able to hide behind Lex Luger. Just like as we saw in that film, you hide behind different friends or you hide behind different partners as you've been doing, as you say, for the last year. You think you've been running after this belt? You think you've been wanting a title match with me? Well, I think that piece of film was very obvious, very evident. The fact of the matter is, all you like to do, Bryan Christopher, is run that little mouth of yours, but when it gets right down to it, you don't really want none of me. You don't really want to get in the ring with me. I am going to give you a whipping like you should have had a long time ago. You understand what I mean? I am going to give you the whipping of your life. I am going to not only embarrass you, I am not only going to humiliate you, I am not only going to show everybody in Memphis, Tennessee, that I am still the king and you still are a punk. I'm going to hurt you down there Monday night. I'm going to hurt you bad so that you will remember me and you won't ever be coming out here in front of all of these people saying, you want another shot at the king. Remember that, punk. I am the king. You are the punk, and I'm going to prove it Monday night.
He's the king and Bryan is the punk. All right, so before we move on, 1993, Jerry Lawler versus Bryan Christopher. What do you guys think of that matchup?
I mean, I think it's definitely awesome. I mean, what's funny is, you know, obviously the little Corey Hart reference there, sunglasses. And you know, he did throw his little, somebody should have, spanked you.
The whipping you should have got a long time ago. Even his eyes kind of twinkled when he said that. I don't know. It's like there was a, you kind of seen something on his face where it's like, if you know, you know.
Yeah. Dude, Lawler's one of the best talkers ever. I mean, he's one of the best workers ever. A lot of people go with the Flair thing. Flair's one of the best wrestlers ever. Lawler's one of the best workers ever.
Absolutely.
Not only did he have to, sell out the building, he had to do it every single week. Not a different city, not a different state, the same buildings. That's a big, Flair would sell out an arena at a time, not the same building every single week. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But Lawler was the best. I mean, his cadence is there. He's got the audience right in the palm of his hand.
Yeah. 3 years ago, I would have never said that, Bryan. But right now, I absolutely 100% agree because, I would have never said anybody was better than Flair. But becoming, an adoptee of Memphis, I feel like now with the Wolfie D podcast, I'm going to mention that a million times. I get it. But I do feel like I've really learned that, man, people slept on Lawler, man.
Yeah, I did. I used to, when I was working around here, I used to kind of dismiss Lawler. But no, man, he's the best. I mean,
man, I grew up on Lawler. He was my favorite wrestler as a kid. Like, I talked about this with Brian Trammell on the show a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
When Lawler won the AWA World Title in 1988, like, I went to school the next day just hyped. I was telling everybody that was the biggest damn, because I wasn't a sports guy. Like, I didn't give a shit about football or baseball or any of that.
Yeah.
So I went to school, like nobody could figure it out. Most of them were like, who the hell's Jerry Lawler? Like,
That's-
why is Gene carrying on about this?
That's so interesting, everybody's first experience, because mine was the Burger King where he was roasting the hearts on WWF TV. You see what I'm saying?
That's wild. Yeah, absolutely.
That is interesting.
But I've said this for years, and you know, in both these guys, I'd love to hear if you agree with this. But I have said for years that I thoroughly believe that you could have put a camera in the parking lot of the TV5 studios and showed a car pull up and show Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler get out of that car together. Yeah. They could have held hands walking in the building together, walked out to the desk with Lance Russell or Dave Brown, started a promo where Jerry Lawler was the heel and Bill Dundee was the baby face. And in the course of one promo, however long it lasted, they could have swapped roles 2 or 3 times, and the crowd would have went with it. They would have went from one to the other. You could have believed, even though you seen them pull up together and walk in together, you would have believed they hated each other. And if they made up and hugged each other at the end, you would have been like, okay, they had a really big problem, and now they just worked it out, and now they're super cool. And you would have went on that ride with them, and you'd have believed it every step of the way. I believe that with all my heart.
Amen. I agree. Yeah.
So next up on the show, now you're going to find this interesting, Jimmy. I don't know if you know this. There's this tag team they used to have come along in Memphis. They was called PG-13. Okay?
I've heard.
So one of them was this guy named JC Ice. Turns out he was Jamie Dundee, and I think he was some relative of maybe Bill or Crocodile. I'm not sure.
Sure, one of them.
And then he had this newcomer named Sir Wolfie D. And so they were on their way to the USWA. So this is old school here. This ain't just like people will just show up on TV. For the last 2 weeks, we've seen this same music video, this rap video from PG-13. Well, this week, we've got a new one. We've got the second rap video from PG-13.
Yeah.
So let's check this out, folks. Let's hear the latest rap video from JC Ice and Sir Wolfie D.
Yes.
PG-13.
What's up, man? Hey, yo, what's up, man? You know what? That Super Bowl, man, 27, bro. Them Dallas Cowboys run all over Buffalo. Wasn't even no competition, bro.
Yo, speaking of competition, you know, since we've been around here, man,
what's up?
You see some competition up there somewhere, man?
There's no comp up there, bro.
Hold on. Is there something under there somewhere?
Nothing under there either, bro.
I don't see. Whoa, competition back there?
Ain't nothing back there.
None, man. Where's it at?
What's up? Matter of fact, you know, the USWA ain't got no competition for PG-13, bro. What's up with 1990, man? Rock and roll is out of shape and out of date. Rap and soul is here to stay, bro. Tell them what
what's going on. We what's happening. Everybody else, the Atari, we the Super Nintendo and the Genesis and all that. We up to date. We happening. We too smooth, man. Too smooth.
Matter of fact, we so smooth. Let them bust on this. Check this out. Jump, 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 jump.
Bring it on. Where's the competition? I'm Wolfie D and I'm about to start dissing the King Jerry Lawler. What a good place to start. Go watch the gig, you ain't nothing but a mark. Yeah, you heard me. Now what you gonna do? Not a thing but get jacked. Sit down, fool, and Jeff Jarrett. Boy, you think you're so hot. You bleach blonde so you jump punk to his eye. Now JC Ice, are you ready? It's your time to start rocking the mic and put an end to the rhyme.
Up and away, here I go, the Mac Daddy, Jason Ice Cold, taking control. I'll slam you, I'll ram you, I'll show you the deal. Give it up, Daniel Davis, cause you're over the hill. Are you an eagle, a nightmare? Who are you, G? How about a straight up honky? Sounds good to me. Richard Lee, to you and your pet poodles. Look at yourself, eating kick a poodle. Ha ha, kick a word up, man.
All right, folks. I want you to think about something, people.
Man.
On live Memphis television in 1993, Wolfie D called Jeff Jarrett a twizzot and Carney, and nobody called it.
Y'all Atari, we Super Nintendo, we up to date.
Right. Okay, so many times during the conversations on the podcast, Wolf is constantly talked about how, Jamie has no rhythm or no. So it was brutal for him. And honestly, what's funny, you could also in that same sentence say, no question, Jamie is one of the greatest ever on the microphone. as far as that goes. But when it came with music, video shows, and nothing changed. Even if you go on to the Nation of Domination run, nothing changed. Jamie has no tempo, no time.
That shit was pre-taped and he was off.
I know. He was off.
What was up with Jamie sounding? He sounded like a vato. He didn't sound
I
like
did get an element of that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I got to say. Thank you for showing me that.
So, folks, if you enjoyed that, next week on episode 8, I've got a special one-on-one interview with Wolfie D that I did recently.
Ooh.
And so Wolfie sits down with us, and he goes in depth on the formation of PG-13, how it came about, coming up with the name, those videos. He says, well, I'll just let you watch it. There's a really fun detail about a couple of those lines in the rap, those initial raps. But if you ever want to know the complete backstory on PG-13, make sure you check that interview out. I had a great time talking to Wolfie, and it's something fun people may not know about the way this podcast software works that I've got. So like when you guys are watching a video, I can see the video just like you if you're watching this, and the guys that are guests are watching it. But I also, at the bottom of my screen, I see them. I see their faces as they're watching the video. So when I had Wolfie on the show, I showed Wolfie that first rap video that they did. And you can't see Wolfie on the screen, but I can. And so as soon as the video starts, like as it's going, I'm watching the video and I'm watching Wolfie, and Wolfie's like, he covered his face a couple of times. He's laughing a couple of times. Then when his part came up, he's like rapping along with it a couple of times. So it was really fun to see him go back and watch that and enjoy it and have as much fun as we are watching it. So make sure you check that out next week because it's a fun interview. And Wolfie's a really good guy, and so is Jamie. And I've got it slated. We just got to find a time to sound it. We're going to talk to Jamie and hear his perspective on the beginnings of PG-13 and hear him, tell his side of the story too. So that'll be coming up pretty soon as well.
Wolfie was a bully in elementary school.
Oh,
You know that story, Jimmy?
Yeah, from Athena. I bet you've heard that.
Yeah. They used to go to elementary school together. Wolfie and Athena. He used to bully the shit out of her.
Oh. Who would have thought?
Yo, baby, yo.
Everybody thinks Wolfie's the baby face of the duo, and turns out he's a bully.
He's the Izzy.
But no, I had a lot of fun doing that interview, and man, PG-13. You talk about a homegrown team that went on to become, as far as I'm concerned, really the last two homegrown stars of the Memphis territory.
Yeah.
I mean, it had life after USWA, and you had, Power Pro and the Corey Macklin years and all that jazz, but they were the last money drawing act that really, really, packed houses and drew crowds with the Smoky Mountain feud and the feud with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich and all of that. And like I said, I told Wolfie, I was like, hey man, I want to get you back on in the future as we go down the line through these feuds and, get insight from you and Jamie and everybody that I can track down, as we go along. So we'll get into more of those as we come to them. And of course,
PG-13's awesome, dude. They're definitely in the top 10, top 20 tag teams of all time. They get slept on but they were everywhere, dude. And their stuff was entertaining. They can cut promos. They could work brawl. They could work high flying. They could work everything. They were great. They were great, man.
And then the promos.
Yeah.
But they were such. I talked to him in that interview. They were such heat machines. They were beating enhancement guys, using the hubcap to beat enhancement guys. I mean, that's straight up heel shit right there. But like I said, we'll talk to Wolfie next week. But anything you want to know about Wolfie D, at the end of this show, we're going to tell you how you can find everything you want to know about Wolfie D and more with the Live and in Color Wolfie D podcast with Jimmy Street. But we're going to give him a chance to plug that at length at the end of the show. So stick around for that, because right now it's time to talk about match number 2. Now we're about 40-something minutes into this episode of the show, of not just our show, but the actual USWA show. And we're on match number 2 as the unified world champion, Jerry the King Lawler, takes on the Rock and Roll Phantom, who is also accompanied by Burt Prentice and Mike Samples. And, there was speculation when the Rock and Roll Phantom was first announced. Jeff Jarrett hinted, and even the announcers kind of hinted that they thought it was going to be the Honky Tonk Man, because the Honky Tonk Man was doing spot shows for them. And then Honky Tonk showed up on TV a couple of weeks ago and came out and kind of promoted those spot shows. But we're fixing to take a look at a clip, and I want to see if these guys can venture a guess on who they think the Rock and Roll Phantom is. And I don't think it's the Honky Tonk Man, but I won't say for sure. We'll see if Jimmy and Brian can give their best guess to who this guy could possibly be. Let's take a look.
The Rock and Roll Phantom I thought we were going to see, but listen, Corey, he's caused some problems since he's been here. By the way, I see Lex Luger headed this way again.
Yeah, here comes the narcissist, Lex Luger. And there's the Rock and Roll Phantom, as you said, Dave. Yeah, he's caused some trouble in the USWA, and he's causing trouble right now for the king, Jerry Lawler. Rock and Roll Phantom comes out of Shreveport, Louisiana. Yeah, Lex.
The King, Jerry Lawler. I had to come out here live and in person, grace everyone with my presence, because everyone wants a match with me. And right now, it's not going his way.
Oh, there goes the strap of the king. He knows the Rock and Roll Phantom.
See what happened when I walked out, Corey?
Yeah, well, what about that, Lex?
What was that?
Oh, come on. Hey, look at Samples. He turns around.
What is going on here?
Lawler nails him.
Wrestlers nailing managers and
managers getting in, tripping wrestlers. What about that?
Well, he's
trying calls for the bell. Yeah. There's 3 against 1 in there now, Luger. Now, what about that?
Poor Jerry. He's not looking good right now.
Here comes Jeff Jarrett to help him. Jeff Cleaser.
Here we go. 2 wrestlers with 1 wrestler.
Look out.
Here comes Brian up the odds, as it should be.
Yeah, here comes Christopher.
Boy, isn't it great that I'm here? Look how excited everybody is. Look at that. It's out of control.
It's exciting.
My mere presence, but everyone's out of control.
Christopher has no business in there.
That I'm here.
Boy, Christopher goes after Lawler in there.
2 on 2. It looks like they're in charge.
It looks, wait. It looks more like 3 on 2 again when you got Rock and Roll.
Suit and tie guys, business guys. I'm sorry.
I count the business guys when he throws a fist like Samples is doing right there.
Oh!
Jerry started it.
Yeah, Lawler goes over and nails Samples. I think.
Did you notice how Samples fed out the ring from that punch?
Yeah.
He just walked out. He's like, I'm going to get the hell out of this dude.
Some good shots from Brian and on Lawler in the corner there. He got some good shots in before they came back on him. But I don't think that Rock and Roll Phantom is the Honky Tonk Man. Has anybody got an idea? They say he's from Shreveport, Louisiana, but I think he's probably from closer to Greasy Corner, Arkansas. I think
if I was the Honky Tonk Man, I'd be pissed if people thought that was me. Like, what the fuck, man? Look, do I look like that? Was it a Hickerson?
Yeah, I don't know who it is, but my guess would be like Spotty, Moondog Spot, or Rex, one of the Moondogs, maybe. I don't know.
That's actually Outlaw Don Bass.
Oh, okay.
So let me tell you guys something from the 80s up into the 90s. If anybody asks you who somebody was under a mask, especially if they were rather portly,
sure.
If you guess Don Bass or Roger Smith, you've got a 50-50 shot of being right, because those guys were assassins, they were interns, they were, anything you could name. And then Don just suddenly shows back up as the Rock and Roll Phantom, which was just really odd.
That's a Jerry Lawler name for sure.
I'm thinking that maybe they had intended for Honky Tonk to play that role, and then it didn't work out, so then they switched it to Don Bass. But anyhow, this match served its purpose to get us some more interaction with Lawler and Bryan Christopher. And I got my Bryan Christopher segments confused earlier. Lawler didn't get a hold of Bryan at the end of that segment. It was this segment where Lawler chased Bryan into the curtains and then beat him up as we went to the commercial break. And so we return from the commercial break, and Corey tells us about all the action the USWA is bringing to your town, and we hear about all the cards coming up around the area. And then Dave is joined by Jeff Jarrett to talk about his upcoming match with the Rock and Roll Phantom, because you see, Jeff Jarrett wrestled Bryan Christopher on today's TV, and then he's going to wrestle Lawler on Monday night, and then Lawler wrestled Rock and Roll Phantom, who's going to wrestle Jarrett on Monday night. So kind of funny how that worked out. And just so happens they all end up interfering in each other's matches. Funny how those things works out in wrestling. But before we hear from Jeff, Dave wanted us to see what happened the last time they wrestled. So we're going to go to a clip that gives us a little bit of the match they had a couple of weeks ago between the Rock and Roll Phantom and Jarrett. But the real reason I'm showing it, well, there's two reasons I'm showing this clip. One is there's a pretty stiff guitar shot at the end of this thing. It's ironic that Jeff Jarrett's on the receiving end of a guitar shot instead of giving a guitar shot. But the other is because this gives you a little sample of what the shtick was that the Rock and Roll Phantom and Burt Prentice did pretty much before every Rock and Roll Phantom match on the spot shows, any of the shows that wasn't on TV. This is what went on. So let's check this out.
The Phantom whips him into the rope. Drop kick on him. Jumps over. He grabs Simple. Prentice jumps in it. Now Burt Prentice, but look out, Jeff, for that Rock and Roll Phantom. He's got the guitar over here. Jeff turns around and he busts it on. Oh, my God. 4 minutes and 50 seconds.
Now, I don't think that was one of those balsa wood guitars that Jeff was busting over people in WWF and WCW.
Yeah. They didn't look too gimmicked. No,
I think Don pulled that out of the back of his closet somewhere. And so for people who are listening to this only in the audio version, you might want to go look this one up on YouTube and watch the podcast here, because when you just heard the music at the beginning, what's going on this? Burt Prentice and the Rock and Roll Phantom are lip syncing a duet as Rock and Roll Phantom pretends to play the guitar, and Mike Samples holds a microphone to the Rock and Roll Phantom's mouth as he lip syncs. Burt is dancing and prancing around the ring, lip syncing this song. And you guys know as well as I do that Burt is in his element right here. Like, Burt loved these spots where he could sit out there and lip sync and dance to these songs before the match.
Oh, yeah.
He would rather do that than any of the shit they did in any of the actual wrestling matches. This was his thing right here. So, and that's what this gimmick was for the entirety of the Rock and Roll Phantom and Burt Prentice's shtick in Memphis. They would do this lip syncing bit before the match. And like I said, I'm sure Burt probably like, oh, it's going to be great, Jerry. Let us do it. And Lawler, I don't give a shit, whatever.
I'm sure it got heat. It got heat with me.
Yeah, I can gauge the reactions as soon as they come on the screen.
I was laughing my ass.
Like I think both of y'all are like, yeah, that's Burt. That's exactly what I would expect him to be doing right now.
You got to look up some of his stand-up. He used to do stand-up as Moo Moo Miller.
Yeah,
I read about that in his book. I haven't seen any of it, but yeah, if there's some on YouTube, I'll definitely look that up.
It's interesting.
I'm guessing the Rock and Roll Phantom is not a classically trained guitar player as well.
No, and what's funny is this is actually revisiting a gimmick Don Bass had already done. In '87, they did a deal where Don Bass shows up as the singing cowboy. And Jerry Jarrett's next door neighbor in Nashville was this old time country singer named Bobby Bear. Who had a few hits. Well, they did this deal where Don Bass come out and claimed to be this, great singer. And then he would cut to videos of him with a guitar. That's probably that same guitar, lip syncing to Bobby Bear songs. And the reason they were able to get away with it was because Bobby Bear was Jerry Jarrett's next door neighbor and he told them they could do it, which it was the 80s. They didn't give a shit about music rights anyway, but that's what the story's always been. That's kind of how it came about, is like he told Jerry, well, if you want to do something with music, you can. And this is what Jerry came up with. Let Don Bass go and pretend he's singing them. And then Lance and Don Bass would have a big argument. Come on, that's not you. And then, Don Bass, it is. Of course, that's me. And that gimmick went on for weeks and weeks. So Rock and Roll Phantom was kind of like an homage to a previous Don Bass gimmick without coming out and saying it's Don Bass. But if you know Don Bass, you could spot him from a mile away. Even as a kid, as soon as he walked out, I'm like, that's Don Bass.
He has the same tattoo, right? The big tattoo.
Yeah. I mean, as far as he didn't wear, he used to have knee pads that had like little caricatures on them on the front of them. Funny little aside, I won't go too far in this story, but one time when the Dream Machine had made his way back into wrestling in like 1999 and was like way out there, in really bad shape. He was in the dressing. We did a show in West Memphis, Arkansas, and there was like this 10-man tag team match, and I was in it with some guys, and we were against Don Bass and Hoss Williams and a few different other guys. And Dream Machine had been back there asking people. He was trying to get a match, and the promoter wasn't going to let him wrestle, but he's like, if I can find some knee pads, I'm going to wrestle. He was asking everybody for knee pads, and nobody would give him any knee pads. And he was asking people for T-shirts, and nobody gave him a T-shirt. We go out and have this 10-man tag match, which was half the locker room in the ring at one time. Obviously, it was like semi. Yeah. We come back in, and so the match before ours, Doug Gilbert had wrestled Blade Boudreaux, and Doug had bled, and he had on a T-shirt, much like the one I'm wearing right now, actually. And Doug had bled all over this T-shirt. And he pulls the T-shirt off and throws it over the side. He goes back there. It was an armory, and there actually was a shower back there. And he went to go shower. Well, we come back, and I don't know whose tights they were, but Dream Machine is wearing somebody's tights, and he's wearing Donnie's knee pads, and he's got Doug's bloody T-shirt on.
God.
And he's like, I can have a match. And Donnie's like, give me my knee pads. And he's like, these aren't your knee pads. And he's like, yes, they are, Dream. Give me my knee pads. He's like, these ain't your knee pads. And Donnie's like, they got my picture on them, Dream. And they were the ones that had his little character and it said Outlaw Don Bass. And he's like, and you're wearing Doug's shirt. He's like, this ain't Doug's shirt. He's like, it's got Doug's picture on the shirt. And he's like,
matter of fact, that's Doug's
had these
blood
for years. Yeah, it's Doug's blood. I mean, he's like, I've had these knee pads for years, Donnie. How dare you? It almost broke down in tears. It was such a, I mean, it'd be funny if it wasn't so sad. But anyway, he was going through a tough time. But we have went way off the beaten path of that one. I've been waiting to tell that story at some point, and I thought, well, now's as good a time as any.
Let's roll it out.
But anyway, so we follow that clip up with a promo from Jeff Jarrett. He talks about the difference between commanding and demanding respect, and says he's looking for revenge this week for the guitar shot. He promises the Rock and Roll Phantom will end up on his back this week. And again, the irony of Jeff Jarrett taking a guitar shot here is pretty fun, right? I mean,
a year later, he's in WF, right?
Yeah.
Doing the guitar gig.
Later, yeah. At this point, he had did the deal where they had him jump the rail at the Pyramid, and he challenged Bret Hart to an Intercontinental title match, which was really, from a kayfabe perspective, where all this WWF USWA intertwining started.
Gotcha.
And went from there. So back in the studio at this point, Doug Gilbert makes his way out to the desk, and Dave Brown introduces him as Doug Gilbert, and Doug corrects him and lets him know that he's the king of rock and roll. Let's just take a look at some highlights of this promo, and we'll talk about it on the other side. And let's listen to this.
Where's Eddie, Doug?
What'd you call me, Dave? What'd you just call me?
Doug Gilbert.
No, there is no more Doug Gilbert, Dave. What you will call me is the king of rock and roll, and I am from Memphis, Tennessee. And let me tell you why, Dave. I think you know a couple weeks back, I would be wearing the World Tag Team belts right now. But my brother, Mr. Irresponsible, he does not make his flight. He don't show up. One thing, the next time something happens and my brother gets just a little bit late, Dave Brown, I'm going to slap him. I'm going to slap him real hard like my dad should have many years ago. I will stomp a mud hole in his butt. Okay?
The first thing you got to understand and do is learn to have a respect for your elders. Okay? It seems like to me, 3 weeks ago, Doug, I was not here. And I want to explain to everyone, shut up! Just shut up, okay? Message from your brother that says just wait right here. Don't, shut up! Wait right here for him. Don't go anywhere. And then, Dave, I'll wait around. New TV must have started. I'll walk around the airport. You know those lounges there, they have those TVs there. Yeah. Well, this airport here does. And I look up there, and what do I see? Your big, fat face on this television talking about me. Celebrated my 14th year in this business, and you haven't even celebrated your 6th yet. Okay? That means you've got 8 more years to go to say you're the king of anything. And when you want to grow up and be a man and you want to team up with me again and you want to talk to me, well, you find me then. But for right now, why don't we just go back here to the back and just finish this up right now.
Eddie wanted to discuss it, and Doug nailed him from behind here.
Come on, Doug. Boy, I'm stunned.
I'm telling you, you're the king of wrestling. You're the king of wrestling. You're nothing.
So that was actually there was a lot more of that clip. So to kind of recap for people who haven't been watching the show or whatever, a couple of weeks ago, they had a USWA Tag Team title tournament. Eddie and Doug were supposed to be in the tournament. Doug comes out and says that Eddie had no-showed, and then he just takes on a random partner, Tony DiNucci, and they end up losing to Mike Miller and Brian Christopher when Doug turned on Tony because Tony wouldn't tag him in because he was getting his ass whipped and couldn't tag him in. And so, according to the Observer, Doug had come out and said that Eddie no-showed because he was in Philadelphia working a show against Terry Funk. According to the Observer, that was true, but they've redefine the story here to say that Doug comes out and says that Eddie no-showed him, left him hanging, and now he's supposed to have a tag title match today against the Bruise Brothers. Now Eddie's no-showed again. Eddie shows up, much to Doug's surprise. Eddie says, "No, I didn't no-show last time. You were supposed to pick me up at the airport. I got a message when I got to the airport, told me to wait here." Then Eddie says he looks at a TV and sees that Doug is on the TV at the studio in Memphis saying that he no-showed him. And basically that Doug lied and, set him up. And basically what we're doing here is we're kicking off a feud between the Gilberts with Doug as the heel and Eddie as the babyface, which I was super excited about at the time because I was a huge Eddie Gilbert fan growing up, which in turn meant I was a Doug Gilbert fan when he came along. Now, for years, I remember when this happened, this whole King of Rock and Roll thing perplexed me completely because you had, like I said, you had the Honky Tonk Man who had been on TV recently. They advertised him at the spot shows. Then you got this Rock and Roll Phantom out here. And now all of a sudden, Doug was here 2 weeks ago. He wasn't the King of Rock and Roll, but suddenly Doug comes out here with his hair slicked back and he's the King of Rock and Roll with no context, no backstory really. And so I always wondered about that because this gimmick goes on for a little while and then it just kind of disappears. And finally, Doug explained it like in his RF video shoot interview years and years later. He said that Jerry Jarrett was up in, since he was working with Vince McMahon in the WWF, that the WWF was supposed to be sending Honky Tonk Man on some foreign tours and that Honky Tonk Man had fell out with Vince and he didn't agree to the money they wanted to pay him. And that's why he was down here doing these Memphis spot shows because he wasn't working WWF anymore. And that Jerry was trying to get Doug plugged into those bookings that Honky Tonk Man was supposed to get, which I guess meant he had to play Elvis because that's why all of a sudden Jerry told him to come out on TV as King of Rock and Roll. However, I don't guess that ever took place because Doug had his Japan deal, that, which was where Doug, really made his money over the years. And so it ended up not happening anyway. So this whole King of Rock and Roll thing was just kind of a weird era of Doug Gilbert. Because, Doug started out, he was just Doug Gilbert, and then he was like Dirty Doug Gilbert, and then he was the King of Rock and Roll Doug Gilbert. It took several years before we got to the dangerous Doug Gilbert we know today. So I don't know. It was just kind of a weird thing. But I mean, what do you guys take on how they kicked off this feud, and what are your thoughts on a feud between the Gilberts here in 1993?
He was first of all, that was the slickest I've ever seen Doug Gilbert. He was his hair slicked back, all dressed to impress. The first thing I noticed, the USWA is running family angles out the ass, man. It's like 3 or 4 families. They got the Jarretts, the Lawlers, the Dundies, and yeah. But no, I love Eddie Gilbert. Doug Gilbert's awesome too. I love it.
Yeah, Doug is a different guy. So, Gene, as long as you never have Chase Stevens on this podcast, you'll have a chance of having Doug on. So that has been why 153 episodes into the Wolfie D podcast that unfortunately we have not had Doug. But that was because we had Chase. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But Doug is funny because the first time I ever met Doug, Billy Gunn was working there. No, I take that back. Several shows after I'd met Doug. Billy Gunn is on a show. We're working for NWA Saw, TJ Weatherby, and Krull, our buddy. And I walk up to Billy Gunn, and I'm like a fan of music. I'm a musician. So I walk up to Billy Gunn, and I say, "Hey, Billy, I loved the New Age Outlaw music." I was like, "Did you guys have any say in that? Like, did you get to talk about it at all with Jim Johnson or whatever?" And Doug looks up at me and he goes, "Well, ain't that about a mark?" I just kind of walked away. I was like, "Okay, I get it." So anyway, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. But it's a little love-hate with Doug. But hey, Doug's a good guy, and I appreciate this right here. I agree with Brian. He looks great right here. You know?
Was Eddie working ECW at this time, booking for ECW?
Yes.
Because if he was working funk, it had to have been at an NWA anniversary show up in Jersey or Philadelphia, or one of the two.
Yeah.
I'd have to check the timeline. I don't know if this is before or after Doug. I mean, Eddie would have been booking, and Doug would have did the Dark Patriot up there and in Philadelphia and all that.
I know you were talking about.
Go ahead.
I know you were talking about the king of rock and roll, where he was what Jarrett was trying to plug him in up the WWF. Well, I mean, they slid him into the Royal Rumble that year, didn't they?
Yeah, he ended up in Royal Rumble.
Was it that
95. We're a couple of years.
Oh shit! I'm 2 years. I'm fast forward.
It all runs together, but yeah, he ended up there in 95 in the Royal Rumble.
Yeah,
and that whole timeline. I don't know. That whole timeline is kind of weird because if they were using Honky for that in 93, that would have been the only thing really that Honky had going on up there in 93 because he was off TV and everything. But I know they did a lot. I mean, kind of like what you was talking about off the air about how they air different stuff in Europe. They use different people on the European tours than what you saw on the American television. So that's very likely that's what was going on.
The one thing I forgot to mention about like family working each other, I just like it better because they're clearly stiffer. They're clear, you know what I mean? They're clearly, they don't, they can be in the moment and hit you harder. And that's what I like to see. I mean, because they were working, they were working really good.
I mean, I can only assume I haven't ever talked to him about it, but, Eddie and Doug did work each other in Global when he was the Dark Patriot and Eddie was the babyface. But I have to assume that, Doug was pretty thrilled to have this opportunity to feud with Eddie here in Memphis as, himself, and it wasn't a long-term feud, but, I'm sure it's something, especially, given, that, we'd lose Eddie barely a year later, something he's glad that he got the opportunity to do. So it's going to be fun to watch that feud develop here in the coming weeks here on the show. So look forward to that. So since the Gilberts have now fell out, Doug has attacked Eddie, and, they were scheduled to challenge the Bruise Brothers in our next match for the USWA tag titles. Clearly, that's not going to happen. So we've had to find some replacements. So the Bruise Brothers go from scheduled to take on Eddie and Doug Gilbert to the replacements are going to be Sam Norris and J.R. Alzado.
Oh, okay.
I mean, everybody knows those guys, right?
The Bruise.
I don't have a clip of that because here on the show, we've been seeing these weekly just enhancement talent, brutal beatings from the Harris brothers. Like, I mean, these guys have been just killing. I don't. I really don't.
You know them, Jimmy?
No, I don't actually. No, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right, so I can talk shit. You know, one of them had to sue a doctor up in Hendersonville for tit job, right?
No.
Gene, I swear to God. Yeah, it's a lawsuit. Look it up. That's why one of them wore a shirt and the other one didn't.
Okay.
It's either Ron or Don. But
it's one of them two.
Yeah, but you can feel free to clip that out if you want. Clip this.
No, we'll leave that in because so here's the fun fact. I don't know how much of the show either one of y'all have ever seen, but my usual co-hosts are a guy named Josh Briley, who is the nephew of Nightmare Danny Davis, and another friend of mine named Richard Mulliken, who he did some wrestling in the Corey Macklin era of Memphis wrestling as Max Corbin. But anyway, at the end of the show, when I ask, each week, I'll say, what was your least favorite segment? Every week for a series of weeks, without fail, Josh Briley's least favorite segment of the show was the Bruise Brothers every week. And it wasn't, a lot of people have been messaging me like, is that a bit? I'm like, no, like, I don't, like, me and Richard don't know why he hates the Bruise Brothers and why he shits on their segment every week, but it's just, and then he got to the point, like the last show that he was on, I'm like, all right, Josh, tell me which Bruise Brothers segment you hated. And he's like, I hated all of them. They suck. So it's just kind of become a fun thing. So he's going to, I can only figure, I told Richard, I'm like, at some point we're going to have to see, we're going to get to a week where the Bruise Brothers must have done something to Uncle Danny that pissed him off. It's got to be it's got to be it, right?
Yeah.
But he's going to love that you had a story about
the tit job?
Botched tit job on
I'll send you the lawsuit papers. I have it, like, for real.
Oh yeah, and I'll forward those to Josh because this will be Josh's new favorite episode. He'll want me to clip it out and then share it, not clip it out and edit it out.
Them motherfuckers be at my door, dude. I don't want to take an H-bomb in my front yard. I'm good.
She'll be fine. Anyway, he said, so Mike Samples is out there. And so every week, like I say, we have the Harris brothers just abuse some poor enhancement talent. And then Mike Samples comes out here and just does a roast on Richard Lee. And this week's no different on commentary. So here's the deal. This week, the gimmick is Harris brothers and Mike Samples versus the Moondogs and Richard Lee in a 6-man match. The titles aren't on the line because it's a 6-man match, but the manager's hair is on the line.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned earlier how USWA's going in hard on the family thing. We've been going in hard on the hair stipulation. Like, Bryan had hair matches every week for 2 months. And then I forget, somebody else has had one since, and now we're already to another hair match. For 2 or 3 weeks in a row, we had boxing matches between managers and referees and women and all this stuff. So I know it's Memphis, and I love it, but holy shit, like, there's a lot of stipulations, guys. We don't have to circle around to the same stipulation like every other week. But anyway,
they're trying anything.
We brought in our new Moondog Splat, the former Mighty Goliath. And this week, either Mike Samples or Richard Lee's hair is going to be shaved. So no Moondogs in studio this week. That's kind of disappointing. Oh, so Mike Samples' big dig on commentary. He said the Harris brothers don't fear the Moondogs. So the only people that fear the Moondogs are owners of buffet style restaurants. So I thought that was pretty decent from old Mike.
That's a good one.
And then Eddie Marlin comes out and he lets us know that the Gilberts have decided that this Monday night they want to fight each other. They don't want to go against the Knights of Darkness. They want to match against each other. So wouldn't you know it, the match with the Knights of Darkness is canceled, and somehow they never do turn up. We never see the Knights of Darkness again. So we'll just never know who that tag team was going to be that would have wrestled the Gilberts that week had Doug not turned on Eddie. So It's going to be a mystery. Was it the Harlem Knights with a different name? I don't know. I just have to purely speculate on that. But anyway, let's take our second podcast commercial break. We'll hear a little bit about WrestleCopia. And when we come back, Dave and Corey is going to run down the Monday night card, and then it's going to be time to ask that all-important question and see what was you guys' favorite part, what was your least favorite part, and would you got a ticket to see this? We'll be right back after these words.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
All right, before the commercial there, we got another look at that guitar shot from Rock and Roll Phantom. I'm telling you, folks, if you're just listening to this, it's worth going on YouTube, if nothing else, to see Burt Prentice and the Rock and Roll Phantom doing their lip syncing routine, and then seeing that guitar shot. Because I'm telling you, that was not the balsa wood guitars we saw on Nitro back in the day. Yeah. That was the guitar that Don Bass had in his closet from the singing cowboy days, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, guys, let's see what this is all building up to, because, you know, in these days, these TV shows, they serve one purpose. This was an 90-minute commercial for the Monday night card. That's why we're here. So let's see what this has all been building to. Let's let Dave and Corey tell us what's coming up this Monday night.
Well, the hip hop wrestling team, they will be going against Danny Davis and Todd Morton in the opening match of the night. Then it will not be the match that we showed you earlier, Eddie and Doug Gilbert as partners. Instead, this situation right here, Doug jumped Eddie from behind as Eddie was walking away. What Eddie had said is, come on, let's go to the back and talk this out. And as he started to leave, Doug hammered him from behind. And as a result of all of that, there's going to be a match between Doug and Eddie Gilbert as they try to settle their differences in the ring Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum. Following that, you got the World Tag Team titles on the line, and all the conversation from Mike Samples out here. And don't be misled by him, fans. His hair is on the line at the grudge match, which I think you understand the grudge situation a little more after seeing the video. If you did not see the previous match in which the Rock and Roll Phantom had help from outside, and including somebody handing him that guitar, which he played poorly at the beginning of everything,
and sang poorly too.
Yeah, and didn't sound like he was actually singing either, to tell you the truth. Rock and Roll Phantom and Burt Prentice, who I'm sure will be in the corner. The grudge match against Jeff Jarrett. Jeff says, look, this guy's trying to make a name for himself against me. I'm not going to let it happen. I'm still staying on track, trying to get another shot at the Southern Heavyweight title and at the World Unified title. Jeff Jarrett against Rock and Roll Phantom. But then the Unified World title will be at stake. Brian Christopher, for all his conversation about time to pass the torch to a new generation. Out here quoting John Kennedy.
Hey. Hold the show. Give me the mic. Hey, hold the show. Don't go off the air. I know. I got a big announcement. I know who the Narcissist Lex Luger is going to wrestle next week. He has told me. I know.
Hey, we're out of time, Brian.
No, I'm going to bring him out here.
Look, you're 2 minutes late. Where were you, for heaven's sakes, the whole time?
No, I got to. Hey, hold on. Don't go off there. I'm going to bring Lex.
So after Brian dominated the first half of the show, he returns at the end, which is pretty apropos. So I stand corrected. So let me apologize. The way these shows all run together. So like as I'm doing as I'm watching and making notes for one show, I'm promoting another show that I recorded 2 weeks ago, and all this stuff starts to run together. When the Moondogs wrestle the Brood Brothers every goddamn week, I start confusing which is which. So it wasn't a 6-man this week. This week it actually is for the tag team titles. So please forgive me, folks that are watching and listening. I misspoke. All right, guys. So it's that time of the show where I ask my co-host to answer these all-important questions. So let's go. We'll follow the alphabetical order here. We'll have Bryan answer first and Jimmy will answer second. So the first question is, what was your least favorite part of today's show?
Least favorite part? Too much Bryan Christopher. I would have to say there's too much Bryan Christopher. They could have drawn out the Doug Gilbert stuff. That was probably my least favorite part, but I enjoyed a lot of the parts. It was just too much. You know what I mean?
That's fair. Back to back.
Yeah, it's just too much.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I got to agree with that. I think the too much of Bryan Christopher, in the long run, is there ever too much Bryan Christopher? But I do think we tapped that vein today for sure. And, much love to Bryan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, everybody gets that. No disrespect intended, but it's just, and the irony of, too much Bryan Christopher. Then later on, he would go on to be a tag team too much. So, all right. So the second question. And the first question is kind of hard because this was a pretty good show. This one may be kind of hard too because it was a pretty good show. What was your favorite part of this week's episode?
As much as I love the Bryan Christopher, the Lawler, the Jarretts, it's got to be that PG-13 music video. Hands down. It's got to be that. You can't beat that music video with Jamie Dundee on rhythm section.
Off rhythm, actually.
Yeah, off rhythm section. There you go.
Yeah.
That'll be that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, not to totally rip off my good buddy Bryan, but honestly, the PG-13 part was great. I mean, the match with Jeff Jarrett and Bryan, obviously was entertaining, but and the Burt dancing around.
Yeah, that was good too.
It was good, but yeah, you're right. I mean, had the PG-13 video not been in this, I would say probably the Burt dancing around, but
yeah, me too.
I think the PG-13 for sure.
Now, let's just be honest, Jimmy. If somehow, and I'm sure you don't watch this show, but if somehow Wolfie had watched this episode and Bryan Turner said his favorite part was PG-13 and Jimmy Street didn't respond that his favorite part was PG-13, how much heat would you have gotten? How much grief would you have gotten from Wolfie D?
It would probably he would be like, oh, come on. He's funny, like stuff like that. He probably
come on, what the fuck, man?
Yeah.
I feel like for a couple of weeks, whenever he'd talk about something to PG-13, he'd been like, I mean, it wasn't as good as Burt Prentice dancing, obviously, but it was all right. Just to break your balls, not being serious. But yeah. All right. So
13 video,
So if this was actually 1993 and, we all live in the Memphis market, would today's episode inspire you to go down there and buy that ticket Monday night to see this show live?
I mean,
yeah.
I think. Okay. I mean, it's like I'm just thinking of myself in that time. I would have loved it, and I wouldn't have even probably thought it was too much Bryan. I would have just been like, yeah, that's what it's.
Well, I would have been probably 9 or 10, and I would have wanted to see Bryan Christopher get his ass whooped by Jerry Lawler. So I would have definitely wanted to go see it. And another thing that I don't know if you've mentioned, Gene, like these ratings that Memphis was getting, it's better ratings than Raw and AEW now. You know what I mean? Nationwide, just for Memphis. I mean, yeah, I would have 100% of it would have gone to that show, but the ratings thing I always found extremely interesting.
Oh yeah, because I mean I'm looking at it from a fan perspective in that time frame.
Yeah,
I'm thinking I want to see Jerry Lawler whip Bryan Christopher, but then again, Bryan's a Southern Heavyweight Champion. He's got 2 managers. Could this be the night the King gets dethroned? Is Bryan really the next King? Because I kind of think, hell, this guy might be his son or something. He looks and kind of sounds like him.
Yeah,
I need to see this. Then also, Rock and Roll Phantom about killed Jeff Jarrett with a guitar last time. I got to see Jeff get revenge. Yeah. And, you know, are the Moondogs going to win the tag team titles back for the 47th time in the last 3 months? I can't miss that.
Right.
The Gilberts are going to fight each other. I've been watching the Gilberts on Memphis TV since 1988. They're going to fight each other. Got to see that.
Was that on the show? They didn't
on the show. Yeah, Eddie.
Yeah,
they didn't put a graphic up because they just showed the picture of Doug kicking Eddie because they changed the card.
Yeah,
but
100%.
So that's on the show. And then our opening match, we're going to, these guys that we've seen a music video for 3 weeks, PG-13's in-ring debut is happening Monday night. They're taking on Nightmare Danny Davis and Todd Morton. So,
look,
come on.
You sold the show better than they did on TV. I mean, now I want to see this show. I mean, because I forgot about half the shit. You forgot one important thing. Todd Morton with his beautiful blonde hair was working PG-13.
I mean,
file, baby.
Just to say a relative of the great Ricky Morton. All right, so let's head down the Coliseum. It's February 15th, 1993. We go down the Mid-South Coliseum. We're drawing 1,000 people to this show. So that's an interesting number because 2 weeks ago, Kurt Hennig came to town, Mr. Perfect from the WWF, fresh off Royal Rumble, came to town, wrestled Lawler. They drew 2,100. That was the biggest crowd they had in weeks.
Wow.
The following Monday night, we brought Doink the Clown to town. We drew right at 1,000. So we cut the crowd in half. But you got to keep in mind, yes, he's off of WWF TV, but he's like 3 weeks on to WWF TV. We've seen him show up, and he hit Crush from behind, but he's not established. We don't really know him.
Right.
So now this week, the big selling point for time at the time was Vince McMahon had told Jerry Jarrett, "Come up here and help me. I'm going to send you a star every week to draw you a house."
Yeah.
They sent Mr. Perfect. Boom. We more than doubled the crowd. That's a win. We send Doink the Clown. We cut the crowd back in half. We got 1,000 people. Now, the next Monday night, we've got all homegrowns. We got Brian Christopher challenge Jerry Lawler. We draw 1,000 people. So now I got to figure Jerry Lawler's going to have to go back to the table, him and Jerry Jarrett, and go, "Hey, my son drew as much as Doink. What you going to do for me next week?"
Right.
As you know, we saw Lex Luger on the show on TV. He could be at the studio on Saturday morning, and little known fact, he left the studio Saturday morning. He drove to Nashville, and the Nashville Fairgrounds, the same day as we just saw him on TV, he wrestled Lawler in a match at the Nashville Fairgrounds that drew about 2,000 people, which was the most people they had drawn to Fairgrounds in quite some time. Now, spoiler, he may show up next Monday night to team with Brian Christopher. We won't spoil next week's episode of the podcast, but just tune in and find out. Well, not next week, because next week's Wolfie D, but you guys know what I'm saying.
I'm surprised they didn't lean harder on like Lex, like Lex saying, "Hey, I might be there on Monday," just to even get.
They didn't even tease it. So.
Yeah, that's just smart promoter booking.
1,000 people have packed the Coliseum. 1,000 people in the Mid-South Coliseum looks sad. I mean, if you've been there, because it'll hold about 9.
With AEW crowd now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And back to kind of circle back to something Brian said a minute ago. USWA with the local Memphis market drew more viewers in the Memphis market than AEW draws nationally.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's stroking out because the most recent episode of Dynamite drew 500,000 people.
Right.
They were drawing like over 1 million in the Memphis market watching.
Like 7 out of 10 households. It was some weird number.
It was more in the 80s, but even in this era, even when they weren't drawing live crowds, they were still drawing TV numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, so Brian's gonna be a little disappointed in this result. Opening match. Not at who won, but just the rest of it. PG-13 defeated Nightmare Danny Davis and substitute Hurricane Hatchet because Todd Morton did not show up.
Eron.
JC Ice pinned.
Oh, was that Eron?
Yeah, Eron.
Oh, I'm happier.
So then you're even happier. So, so it would have been like, oh, shit, Todd Morton's here. Wait a minute. Who's his partner?
Hurricane Hatchet. Oh, shit.
There you go. That was our opening match. In the second match,
Can I
Eddie
tell
Gilbert?
story?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Please do.
No,
absolutely, man.
They're riding. PG-13 is riding from Nashville to Memphis with Iran, and they want to. Iran wouldn't let him smoke weed in his mom's truck, so the PG-13 sat in the back, riding to Memphis, smoking weed, so they can smoke weed while.
Didn't they get into a shoot like a couple weeks after or before this, too?
Because
they were riding buddies.
Wolfie thought that Frank Morrell and Jeff Jarrett were putting him up to shoot on him because Iran's a legit shooter. Like Iran can go, and it's funny it turned into a big deal that wasn't necessarily or should have been because Iran and Wolfie are like best friends. So
wow,
sorry, man.
No, that's what we're here for, man. We're here for fun stories like that, not just results. So,
yeah.
All right. So Eddie Gilbert pins Doug Gilbert. Ron and Don Harris defeat the Moondogs to win back the USWA Tag Team titles. Jeff Jarrett defeated the Rock and Roll Phantom via disqualification. Now, for people who are tracking the results week to week, 2 weeks ago, Jeff Jarrett beat Rock and Roll Phantom by disqualification when the Phantom busted a guitar over his head. Last Monday night, Jeff Jarrett was in the main event tagging with Jerry Lawler against Doink the Clown and Jeff Gaylord, who was subbing for Brian Christopher, who was injured. And Nightmare Danny Davis pinned the Rock and Roll Phantom in the third match. But then the following week, this week, Danny Davis is in the opening match losing in a tag match, and now Jarrett is beating Rock and Roll Phantom by DQ. Like, some of the results are kind of head scratchers. Like,
yeah.
The night of the Kurt Hennig, I keep dwelling on this for the listeners who listen every week. They're going to be like, shut up, Gene. But the week of the Kurt Hennig show, out of 7 matches, 5 matches ended in DQs.
Damn.
I still can't get over. I'm still bitching about it. It's been 3 weeks now. I'm sorry, folks, but
some WCW stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then in the main event for the Unified World title, Jerry the King Lawler pinned Brian Christopher to retain the title.
Nothing funny? No funny duddy in that?
Not that they noted. I mean, there's got to be something. I mean, I would have figured if it's me, Jarrett's pinning the Rock and Roll Phantom and Lawler's beating Brian by DQ because of some, manager interference. So, I don't know, man. This booking in Memphis, it keeps you on your toes because you got to try to figure some of it out. But
I think they were figuring it out on the fly.
All in all, this has been a fun episode, I think. And, I really appreciate you guys coming on here. So let's talk about, we mentioned at the top of the show, if you want to check out Bryan Turner's VHS Rehab, go to youtube.com at Bryan Turner's VHS Rehab. Bryan, give them just a little example of what they can expect to find. What types of wrestling can they find there?
Everything. All right. So if you don't want to remember the long YouTube name, just go to lostwrestling.com. It's simple because it is a lot of Lost Wrestling. It's a lot of the Nashville. It's specifically a Tennessee base, but we do go outside a little bit of the other promotions. We're talking Explosions from TNA, a lot of house shows that were around here, the master footage of a lot of Coleman Studio TVs. So just a little bit here and there, everything. So we're building it as we go.
Awesome. Good stuff, man. And while we're at YouTube, man, go ahead, jump on over to youtube.com at GMBMPW. That is Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling. Tell us a little bit about that podcast, Jimmy, before we get to your other podcast.
So my brother and I grew up huge wrestling fans, okay? And as we all did, right? And so we noticed that every time we would talk to each other, it would be for like an hour. And I would just be like, man, we should record these. And so we started, recording our conversations, and we started doing the show. And then, we started tapping into, similar to Bryan, my friends in the Nashville wrestling scene. Honestly, I feel like my podcast, Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, is very much a sister to Bryan Turner's VHS Rehab, because we're really in really sync with one another in that we basically focus on the same people. I just do it per show as an interview. So I've had anyone from, Hot Rod Biggs, the late great Hot Rod, to Ben Jordan, Steve Neely. You know, we just did a first live podcast in Columbia, Tennessee, with the Devils, the Mortons, and the Wild Boys, telling that decades-long feud story. And the Devil's Disciples, you know, Dante and Mephisto. I mean, Reynolds, Kroll, anybody. I mean, we've had them all. And you know, then we kind of went out and went to my North Carolina fandom roots and got guys like Tommy Angel and David Isley and Gene Ligon and you know, guys like that. But now that I've found that I love my Tennessee people so much, we've kind of swerved back into Tennessee. And anyway, we're just having fun telling stories and talking and telling bullshit, you know.
I think that's a perfect analogy there, is that, you know, check out Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, hear the stories, and as you hear these guys talk about these matches, you can go on Bryan's YouTube and find most of those matches.
Yeah.
So they definitely work hand in hand. And so it's not just on YouTube. I mean, you're all over social media, and at GMB MPW is where they can find it across all the platforms, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's a great podcast. I really enjoy it. Your brother is a great co-host and adds a lot of insight. Also, we might have mentioned it once or twice during the show. You can check out youtube.com at live Wolfie D. But as we said, just like with the other podcast, all across social media platforms at live Wolfie D. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Live and in Color with Wolfie D. Kind of a quick synopsis of how it came together and what you guys do over there.
So 2011, I'm working with Wolfie D at NWA Saw, and we're, you know, working in the scene with Wolfie. And I asked Wolfie at that time, I was like, man, we should start a podcast. At this time, I only knew of a few, like Colt Cabana, Steve Austin, Chris Jericho, and Gene Jackson. And I said, hey, Wolfie, let's do a podcast, man. I didn't know what I was doing. And he said, what's a podcast? Well, that went nowhere. And 10 years later, I asked him on the way to pick up my son. I'm like, hey, bro, let's start a podcast. And I'm telling him all these things. And he's like, oh, yeah. He said, yeah, but I was still selling him on it. And at that point is when I learned how to do a podcast. And so June of 2021, I started doing the podcast with Wolfie. It started out telling his story, but eventually, once we got through that, we led into getting guests on. And man, I don't know, it's been crazy, but I don't know how both of my podcasts have turned into guest interview shows, but I like it. I'm happy about it. But anyway, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, a lot of fun. Man, we've talked to everybody from Hall of Famers to local outlaw guys to just Wolfie's buddies and to Memphis guys. I mean, if we haven't had them on, it doesn't mean we haven't tried. Let's just say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, both of those podcasts are in my regular rotation of podcasts. I really enjoy both of them. And, I don't know, it's kind of like I mean, I've tried to do podcasts in the past where there's 2 or 3 of us trying to do interviews, and that's really hard to do. And you and Wolfie have really perfected seamlessly. I know it probably was tough in the beginning because it takes a little while to learn everybody's timing, and this is where I'll step in, this is where he'll step in, and not step on each other's toes. But you guys over time now, you have gotten where you're seamlessly able to slip in and out of the interviews, and you don't miss anything because, you know, he asked, and then, you know, if there's something that he hasn't picked, I don't know how much planning goes in this, or what, you know, if you guys have the shit laid out, but to listen to it, it sounds like you step in at just the right time and hit them with a question that maybe Wolfie, you know, didn't think of or forgot or whatever. But they're really great. And a lot of times, like you say, because Wolfie knows these guys and you know a lot of them, it just kind of feels like if you were riding in a car to go into a show and these guys are just telling stories, they don't feel like a sit down interview with, you know, and rigid. It's just guys having a conversation. They're comfortable with you guys. Yeah. And that's what I love about it. It's not so much an interview show. It's a conversation show. And for those that know, there's a big difference in that as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, man. That means the world, brother. And that's it's like a car ride. You know, all of us have been able to take car rides in the wrestling business. And you've been in cars with people that you're like, holy crap, how am I in this car with this dude? This guy was on WWE 3 weeks ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're getting to shut up and listen to all these amazing stories. Well, now get to talk in these stories, you know. So we do try to make it a very much car ride on the Wolfie show, whereas in my podcast we try to do a little more like chronological of the history of the so.
And those guys, and I think that's necessary because most of the guys that you guys have on the Wolfie show are guys, they've done shoot interviews. They've done a lot of interviews over the years. So people have heard that structured,
right?
What are your memories of, you know, the Feinsteins and the different people?
Oh, don't get me started on that guy.
Tell me about when you remember when, they've heard all that.
Right.
So it's easy for y'all to just have a conversation. Whatever comes up, comes up. But most of the guys who are more local guys who haven't had that opportunity to tell their story that come on with you and Jared, it's better for you to have that structure and for you to follow along and tell the story of their career. And I think that's beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's good on you as a host and a producer to see that and understand, like, okay, well, this is how we need to do this, but over here, let's not, we don't need to ask downtown Bruno or, you know, name whoever who's had a bunch of interviews to tell us from the very beginning of just like somebody that we talked about off the air that we won't bury or put over here now by saying their name.
Right.
Every interview, they conduct this interview like nobody's ever heard an interview with them before.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, I've heard all this. I already know that. Let's explore something different. So, and again,
one's the deep dive, one's the car ride.
Yeah. And they're both great. So again, check them out at GMBMPW, Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, and at Live Wolfie D. They're everywhere that you listen to the podcast, all the social media platforms, and on YouTube. So check them out. And as far as this show is concerned, I'd love it if you would follow us on Facebook. We got a lot of stuff going on there. We're trying to post a lot of content. We got a lot of great engagement, a lot of new followers every day, and I really do appreciate it. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at USWA Podcast. We've got a store with some T-shirts and different fun stuff, tinyurl.com/USWA Podcast. And if you have any questions, anything you want to, I've had some people email me and message me on Facebook with some really great insight on from wrestlers, from people who know people from the USWA era. Questions that I've asked out loud on here, like, man, I hadn't been able to find anything on this guy. I've had fans and different wrestlers reach out to me via email and Facebook and give me some really great insight that I've been able to come share here. So
your most wanted TV you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I got a big chunk of that recently. I picked up the rest of 95 and most of 96 via somebody who reached out to me like this. So, USWA Podcast at Outlook.com. And of course, WrestleCopia.com. We're proud to be a part of the WrestleCopia brand, all the great podcasts that Ray Russell puts out over there, including the one I do with him, the regional wrestling podcast where we cover week by week Memphis in 1985. So I take in a lot of Memphis wrestling every week, y'all. I watch 1985 Memphis. I watch 1993 Memphis. And then I watch other Memphis just because I enjoy it, because quite frankly, I don't watch any current wrestling. I'm not trying to be that guy. I'm not trying to be the a-hole that dunks on it. I just don't enjoy it anymore. I finally came to the realization of like, I don't like this, and I don't need to do a podcast shitting on it every week. I don't need to talk about it. So I don't. I watch this old stuff. I do podcasts talking about it, and apparently there's people who like to listen to it, and people like you guys who like to come on here and talk with me. And man, I appreciate y'all coming on here this week. It's been a lot of fun. So thank y'all for listening. Again, join us for episode 8 when my special guest will be Wolfie D, and you'll hear all about how PG-13 came to be.